Good afternoon and welcome to the 517th meeting of the Economic Club of New York. I'm Marie-Josée Kravis, the chairman of the club and a senior fellow at the Hudson Institute. And I'm happy to have so many of you here today. As you know, the Economic Club of New York is the country's leading nonpartisan forum for discussions of economic, political, and geopolitical issues. We've had more than 1,000 prominent guest speakers at the club, and they have set very high standards of excellence and debate, and I'm happy that our guest today will certainly enhance the tradition of the club, and I thank Michael Dell for being here. I'd like first to take a moment to recognize those of our 298 members of the Centennial Society who are attending today, because their contribution really ensures the financial strength of the club and allows us to have a very rich and diverse program. So I thank all of you who are here today for your steadfast support. I'd also like to welcome students joining us from the Columbia Business School. Welcome. We always enjoy having students here and try to bring as many of our young leaders or future leaders to the club as possible. It's a real pleasure for me to introduce Chairman and CEO of Dell Technologies, Michael Dell. As many of you probably already know, Michael Dell began his company or started his company with $1,000 at the age of 19. At the ripe old age of 23, Michael really revolutionized not only the production but also the distribution of personal computers and computer services. He walked away from the company in 2005, but he returned as CEO in 2007, setting his sights on growing the company even further, and certainly on growing solutions for solution-focused enterprise computing, and in a sense, and he says it in his own words, in democratizing computer services, whether it be IT, software, and a variety of other computer services. So today, with revenues of $91 billion and a team of 157,000 people, Dell Technologies is one of the world's largest IT companies, serving the needs of global corporations and governments, but also the needs of small businesses and consumers. In 1998, Michael Dell formed MSD Capital, which is a private investment firm that exclusively manages the capital for the Dell family. In 1999, he and his wife, Susan, established the Michael and Susan Dell Foundation, which provides philanthropic support to children and families in the United States, India, and South Africa. Michael is an honorary member of the Foundation Board of the World Economic Forum. He's on the executive committee and member of the International Business Council. He's a member of the Technology CEO Council, the U.S. Business Council, and the Business Roundtable. He serves on the advisory board of ECNY University in China and on the governing board of the Indian School of Business in Hyderabad, India. He's a board member of Catalyst and also served as the United Nations Foundation First Global Advocate for Entrepreneurs. The format today will be a conversation between Michael Dell and John Fort, the host of CNBC's Squawk Alley and the Fort Knox podcast, Mr. John Fort. So I welcome both of our speakers, or our speaker and his interlocutor, to the stage. And thank you again profusely for being here today. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Well, Michael, I'm glad we have the chance to do this again. We've been able to speak quite a few times for CNBC. And this conversation, I think, comes in interesting times. There's a lot of ground that we can cover when we're looking ahead 10 years, as you have been at Dell recently, and then just looking at the landscape, not only when it comes to technology and data, but when it comes to geopolitical forces. So start out, looking out 10 years. 10 years ago, people were talking a lot about Dell and HP kind of locked in this head-to-head battle to see who was going to build this enterprise mega company. Right now, Xerox wants to get together with a piece of that old HP. You think that's a good bet for the next 10 years?
Well, I think they're struggling to find a way forward, and clearly our business has transformed pretty significantly in the last 10 years to be by far and away the leader in enterprise infrastructure, both hardware and software. And look, I mean, we did something very, very different than what that other company did in bringing together all of the leading hardware and software infrastructure. And since we've done that, we've added almost 20 billion in new revenues. It's resonated very well with customers. So far this year, our earnings are up double digits, up 30%. Operating income up 30% year over year in the last reported quarter. So we've got I would say, massively differentiated capability against the traditional competitors. Obviously, the business continues to evolve and change, but there's consolidation going on, and I think the weaker competitors are struggling to find ways to compete.
You feel like you just got ahead of that consolidation trend with EMC, VMware, et cetera. You've done a number more deals, or is there more to go where you feel like you've got to continue to gain scale to compete over the next decade?
Well, we're in a business where it's change or die, quick or dead. Our work is never done, right? In the last couple of years, not through inorganic, but mostly through organic, we've added several hundred basis points of share in all of our major businesses. And so I think there's an organic element, certainly inorganic too. I mean, we've acquired about 40 companies in the last 4 years, mostly in the software security area. That part of our business is growing, quite fast, particularly with VMware and the capabilities we have. And yeah, it's got to continue to evolve, and it's also alliances and partnerships, minority investments in emerging companies that we continue to make, probably one a week in terms of new companies that are out there on the horizon. And all organizations are having to deal with this absolute explosion in the amount of data that they have. And if you step back and you think about all the buzzword bingo that goes on,
There's a lot.
With the 5G and the AR and the IoT and blockchain and
You
blah,
can
blah,
find
blah.
a lot of it
that,
on CNBC, yeah.
Right. So what's behind all of that is just an enormous amount of data.
Yeah, I mean, you said, I believe you've pointed out that 2007, the year the iPhone came out, it was estimated cellular data traffic in the US was about 86 petabytes a year. And a lot of people think that in 10 years, there's going to be that much traffic every 10 minutes.
That's right. And so if you think about this world of pretty much everything in the physical world becoming intelligent and connected, and all of those things generating data, then the objective function question really has to become, how do we turn that data into something useful to create better outcomes for humans, right? And create better results in education, in healthcare, in energy and environment, in every business. Every part of society kind of has to reimagine itself or reinvent itself. And of course, all sorts of new tools and technology are required to do that. And by the way, if you think it's changing fast now, it's just going to go faster, right?
You've called yourself a technology optimist
Yes.
Along those lines, when it comes to what technology can do to not only lift people like Michael Dell, who started a company in his dorm room and has become a billionaire with a multi-billion-dollar company, but those around the world. But I wonder if we're in a period now, you think, of technology cynicism, particularly when it comes to data, and the ways it's been used to amplify even the negatives in human behavior. Are we in a cynical place to some extent in the way people are looking at technology?
Sure. Look, I think there are some business models that are out there that people have where they've been using data, in ways that causes them to make a lot of money, but maybe is not the most humane way, or it reinforces the biases that people have. I think we all have a responsibility with technology to have it reflect our humanity and our values and our ethics and our beliefs. Technology doesn't wake up in the morning and say, today I'm going to be bad, right? Or today I'm going to be good, right? It does what we tell it to do. And, we have to, work together as society and businesses and governments to put the right, I would say, guardrails in place to make sure that this data is being used for good things, and I think overwhelmingly it is. There are some examples where somebody could say, well, this isn't a good thing.
So what do we have to do to get that balance right, not just for our economy, but more broadly? I looked this morning at Google saying they're going to limit the ways people can use advertising to target political messages. They'll still do political ads, but they won't allow really narrow targeting. And to me, that sounds like an effort to do some of what we were talking about, keep data from being used in ways that are potentially negative for society. Does that need to just be a one-off thing where every company makes their own decision? Does there need to be some kind of standard or meeting of the minds?
So, it's kind of easy for me to comment on it because we don't use our customers' data.
Right.
and we enable all of our customers, to let 1,000 flowers bloom and, do it however they want to do it. I think it's going to be some combination of industry and business and really society making the decision. I mean, you already see different decisions in different, geopolitical realms about how companies are allowed to use data. But should the companies be allowed to decide all by themselves? Probably not.
Probably not. So do you have any preference on how these decisions get made? Because there's a lot of talk about regulation, and I hear in technology circles a lot of fear about not only that stifling innovation, but stifling potentially growth. If people who don't really know what they're doing are the ones putting those guardrails on, they might go across the road instead of beside.
Well, and there's a risk that you go to the least common denominator or the worst offender, and you put a regulation in that protects against that, and it kind of messes up all sorts of other things. So the unintended consequences, I don't have a perfect answer. I don't think there is one. I think it'll just be an iteration. I mean, we have the GDPR, we have the California law. I think you'll see different states coming out with laws. Then there'll probably be a federal preemption, about how data gets used. I think transparency is super important in terms of, people want to know how their data is being used. But, again, some of these companies that have created business models where, if you want to believe something, you go online and you'll find a lot of people who believe the same thing. It's just the internet is a confirmation bias reinforcement machine. Which is dangerous.
I want to talk about China. Yeah. You've got a lot of experience there, done business there. It's hard to see what's going to happen between us and China next week. But what about in 10 years? What's your expectation? And in a way, I think it's easier to look out 10 years. What's your expectation of where our trade relationship is going to be in 10 years, whether our technology systems are going to be compatible in 10 years, or if we'll have to, in effect, create a couple of different internets?
So, because of the trade conflicts, we have had to take a number of steps to ensure continuity of supply for our customers. And we've been able to do that, and we have a flexible supply chain. And so, check, that's really important.
How long did that take?
It took some time. I mean, first we had, the tariff list 1, 2, 3, threatened list 4 was going to come in September. We were ready for that. We had a stay of execution, for a while. And so, but we're basically ready and have mitigated that. But there's cost and difficulty involved in doing that. And for better or for worse, we probably had the most flexible supply chain. So maybe we were good at being able to move things around to deal with that, but that's not really something we wanted to do. But we have to be ready for either scenario, either a bipolar world where you have a China-centric and a U.S.-centric. But if I'm the Chinese government and the U.S. government, and I run out the NPV calculation of a bipolar world versus something else, the bipolar scenario is really bad.
For both?
Especially for China.
Why especially for China?
Well, because China has built a manufacturing base that is the factory for the world in many regards. And if you imagine a bipolar scenario, okay, the U.S. and all of its allies, okay, no Android, no Applied Materials, no Tokyo Electron, no AMSL, no Intel, no Microsoft, no ARM Holdings. How do you make stuff? No Texas Instruments, no Analog Devices.
They can't build enough of their own versions of those in 10
Take
years.
a long time. Take a long time, and it would be a huge setback. And they obviously know that. That's why they're trying to, build the alternative while they're trying to negotiate a deal. But again, we have to be ready for both scenarios. I think I continue to believe that the interconnected economy is a good thing. There have been problems in the existing system, and that's where the negotiation is. But we have to be ready for either one.
Do you think that these problems are solvable in the intermediate term, particularly when it comes to intellectual property? Because there are not just charges, but there's evidence, documentation of China putting a lot of weight on U.S. companies to hand over IP in order to do business there. And the Trump administration now is saying, hey, that's got to stop. The overall rationale seems to be, if we don't deal with this now, our trajectory over the next decade is really in danger.
You have to have enforcement mechanisms, and it's a difficult thing. So I don't have a perfect answer for you. And we also have a substantial business in China selling our products. Mm-hmm. And there are a lot of products that we sell in China for which there really are no Chinese replacements, right? And they're super valuable to those customers, and they want to continue to buy them. And
have you had to change the way you sell in this environment?
Well, there's nationalism at play in China, for sure. And so it affects us.
How?
They're buying, they're leaning more toward the local brands.
So what do you have to do in response?
You sell more in the areas where you're highly differentiated, mm-hmm. and you make adjustments as necessary to continue to run a healthy business.
We want to talk about Austin. 40 years ago, 1980, Austin was a very different place than it is today. The economy was not really based on technology, but it has grown over the last 40 years in a very unique way, largely because of Dell, and I would say companies like Dell, but there aren't a lot of companies like Dell. You guys have really been an anchor tenant. Just this week, the president was in Austin with Tim Cook. He's in your house. He's in your backyard saying it's the second most important location behind Cupertino. How much of that is good for you? Is it all good for you? How When you think about the next 10 years of Dell in Austin, is your impact different, less important, more important, what?
So, we have 157,000 people, as we said earlier, in the company, maybe 18,000 in the Central Texas area. So it's important to us, but it's not, a huge percentage of our global workforce. There's 150,000 students within a 100-mile radius of Austin. And this is why lots of companies are moving to Austin. It's a very attractive place to hire and recruit young people. We don't see a lot of people moving to the other companies from our company.
Really?
And
do you see a lot of companies trying to take your people?
Well, I think they figured out what we figured out, which is that stealing people from all the other companies just doesn't work. And so what you have to do is hire them right out of school and train them up.
Okay.
So that's what they're doing. If you just think about the labor shortage in our industry, right, you can't solve the problem by rotating people around the existing companies. You have to increase the supply by looking to non-traditional sources, diversity and inclusion, hiring people early in their careers, even going, into elementary schools and middle schools, and talking about careers for girls in technology. And you've got to widen the pipeline of available candidates, and that's what all the companies are doing.
Is there an inequality lesson in that? Because you look at the conversation around what's happening with the economic stratification in the country right now, and to me, a core issue is economic mobility. Is it harder than it used to be to move from the lower class to the middle class and even to the upper class? And a lot of people would say yes for a number of reasons, including the cost of education. When you look at the way Austin has grown and tapping into what you just said about providing opportunities to young people, is there a lesson there for where the whole U.S. economy, for where U.S. policy needs to go?
Well, look, I think the obvious importance of education and a big part of the inequality issue, is the continuing advancement of the economy and the specialization of skills. No question that that's a big factor. And I think companies like ours and others have a responsibility to figure out, okay, how do we widen the aperture of the talent that we're bringing in and create more of those opportunities. Having said that, if you look at the U.S. economic system, as imperfect as it may be, it's hard to find one that's a lot better. And which of the G20 economies is doing better than the United States, right?
Right.
And so I think the embrace of risk and innovation and entrepreneurship that we have in this country is somewhat unparalleled with any other country in the world.
Do you feel
Maybe
free?
China?
Do you feel as free as ever to trumpet that, to shout it from the rooftops? There are quite a few people in politics now who are telling a different story about the U.S. economy, about billionaires.
Yeah, I've heard about that.
Have you heard that?
Yeah. Apparently, it's not cool to be successful anymore. But
In certain quarters, but I don't meet a lot of people who don't want to be a billionaire.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, is it pretty good?
It's not horrible.
Okay.
Yeah.
But my question
But it's just math. I mean,
money doesn't buy happiness.
But look, I mean, I feel very fortunate to have been born in this country. Okay, I think that was the first lottery ticket that I won. Right, I wasn't born in Kazakhstan, right, or Afghanistan, or some war-torn region. And
if you were, I guess it would be harder to get into the country now.
well, it would have been very hard to do what I did in the United States. Okay, so I happened to go to a public school in Houston, Texas, where I happened to be in an advanced math class, and my teacher happened to get a teletype terminal where I learned how to program when I was in 7th grade. Okay, so that was super lucky, right? And that set me off on a trajectory that has led me here today. But if I hadn't gone to that school, or that teletype terminal hadn't been there, I hadn't been in that math class, or hadn't been in the United States where you could take the risk and you could drop out of college with $1,000 and start a computer company in your dorm room because I didn't have a garage, there you go. So yeah, I feel very lucky, and I think the entrepreneurial engine and the risk and innovation engine we have in this country is the envy of the world. And I mean, if you look at these companies that have been created that are world-leading companies, I think pretty much any country in the world would love to have those countries.
Those companies.
Sorry, those companies,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah. Among the goals that you set for the next decade, I believe you said you've targeted that your workforce will be 50% women, your leadership 40%. What are the numbers now, and what are you going to have to do to make that happen in just 10 years?
Yeah, the numbers now are kind of in the 30s overall and in the high 20s on leadership.
So that's a big move in 10 years, assuming you also hire a man or two.
Yeah, well, we'll promote. Most of our leadership is promoting, and
Right, but even the overall workforce, if you're in the 30s and you're looking to get to 50%.
And look, it's not the first time that we've set stretch, ambitious goals for ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
So we did this about 10 years ago with our Legacy of Good, and we set a whole bunch of goals for ourselves.
How did you do?
We did really well. We first of all, the important thing is that when we set those goals, we didn't know how to do them. Okay, we had some ideas, but they were stretch goals that caused us to invent things and create things to cause it to happen. And the vast majority of those we achieved ahead of schedule. And here it is again with diversity, inclusion, sustainability. We've set a goal for 1-to-1 recycling. Right, which is very aggressive. And yeah, we've been a leader in that, and do we know exactly how we're going to do that 10 years from now? No, but it's the right goal, and we'll go invent things and create things.
So maybe a better question versus exactly how are you going to do it, because you said it's an ambitious goal, you don't necessarily know how. What's your process that you have in place for figuring it out? What did you learn from the past 10 years and the goals that you were able to hit that you didn't know how you were going to hit 10 years ago that helped you set these goals and is going to put your process in place for reaching for them?
Well, it's relatively simple at a concept level. You sort of say, okay, here's where you want to be in 2030, and here's where you are now. Well, what has to happen in each year to be on that trajectory? And let's get all the ideas on the table. And it's a lot of experimenting, testing, failing. Something didn't work. Oh, let's try something else, and continuing to make progress all along the way, and sharing the learning with other companies, because we're not the only company that is embracing social impact. I think it's actually great that more and more companies are setting ambitious goals for themselves. I mean, if you think about all these things in the context of, let's say you are involved in running a company and you lay your head down to go to sleep every night, and you think about, well, why are we doing this, right? And what's the impact in the world? You sort of start to reflect on these things. And, it's actually quite powerful inside a company to set these ambitious goals, and people feel that what they're doing really matters, and they have a purpose to their work beyond sort of, oh, I get a paycheck, and yeah, I'm engaged, and we do good stuff. But it's like, no, this is really important, and we're doing something that really makes a difference in the world.
How much of achieving the goals is concrete incentives, bonuses for getting there? How much of it is people knowing Michael Dell is actually paying attention to how much the needle moves? I'm getting an email, I'm getting a tap on the shoulder if that number moves up as opposed to down.
Yeah, it's all of that. So we have a whole process and motion inside the company for all these things, and I am quite involved in them to inspect and look at the plans and if we're not making progress in one particular area, I mean, you can do pattern recognition pretty easily on this stuff to say, well, okay, what are the enablers? How do you grow the pipeline? How do you make progress? And people are generally motivated by wanting to continue to succeed, and everybody sort of gets with the program, if you know what I mean. So.
Yeah, boss. I can imagine that's what they say.
We don't come up with these things in a vacuum. These are well thought out, well considered things that we think will make a big difference. And yeah, while we don't exactly know how to achieve them, they're within the realm of achievability.
Single biggest danger you see to the U.S. economy over the next 10 years?
It's probably some I don't know, there's some self-inflicted wound or some unexpected alpha particle from space. I mean, it feels pretty strong to me. I mean, I think I don't really, we're not really in the business of worrying about economic cycles. It's just not what we do.
Right.
What we're more worried about is, okay, you've got hundreds of thousands of times more data, right, 10 years from now. How are companies and organizations putting that data to work to improve human outcomes? What's
the U.S. advantage in that scenario? Because I hear from some quarters when you're operating in an AI landscape, China's got an inherent advantage that they can suck up data from everywhere around their country. They've got more than 1 billion people, and they've got no restrictions on how they're going to use it. And that's inherently going to make their drive to artificial intelligence either faster, better somehow. Is there a U.S. advantage in having the system that we have?
I think both systems can succeed, and even if you don't have a separation of the economies in a trade sense, it's likely that those are the two economies that do the best over the next 10 years.
Just in general, or because of AI?
Well, I think look, AI is just the latest wave of technology, right? So, it's the maybe it's at the top of the buzzword bingo pile right now,
right.
But
it was open source, I guess,
right? Yeah,
right?
and it was the internet, and a long time ago it was plastics or electricity. When we're sitting around the campfire, it was fire, right? Look at this technology; it's amazing.
Was that a reference to The Graduate with plastics? Was that?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah. But if you have data and you're not using AI to, get better insights from your data, you're doing it wrong, right? And the problem's going to get worse and worse because you're just going to have mountains and mountains of data.
How much of your workforce, how much more do you expect is going to be outside the U.S. in 10 years than is today?
Good question. About half of our business is in the U.S. and about half is outside the U.S. We've grown quite nicely in emerging markets, but the U.S. still has the predominance of economic activity in technology-centric businesses and activities. I think there'll still be quite a large workforce here in the United States, and we for all the challenges that we have, there aren't a lot of places that are better to invest.
Now, I can't believe I've gone this far into a conversation with Michael Dell in 2019 and not uttered the words 5G. They're going to take.
There's another buzzword.
Yeah, I mean, they're gonna take my badge, my tech reporter badge, on the way out and burn it.
Take away your union card.
Yeah, there you go. So now I'm going to ask it. What is the impact of 5G on that data explosion that you were talking about, on the way you strategically plan for where Dell is going to invest, even geographically? Are you watching which countries, which regions are being more aggressive about turning on 5G and using that as a signal for where economic growth is more possible?
Well, I'm like giddy with excitement about 5G, and the reason is it's not so you can talk on the phone faster. It's
Right.
all about the data and all these intelligent connected things. And there's also underneath the covers a separation of the hardware and software with virtualization, which we happen to be very good at with VMware in creating, these virtual, systems. And you've got this dispersion of technology and clouds and a multi-cloud world, and we're very well poised to help our customers with that. But 5G is like a massive accelerant in everything that's been going on, and it's going to connect everything and create an incredible explosion of data, and it will be a platform on which tons of new innovative companies are built.
And that's what I'm
And existing companies will have to reimagine themselves. So if you look at the crop of new companies that you talk about on your show, that are 10 years old, that are starting to emerge, let's say in the public markets, those companies were built on top of 4G. And they couldn't actually have done what they were doing on 3G. It just wasn't possible. So there's maybe 100 companies that have been built on 4G that are worth over $1 billion each, approximately. Okay?
Yeah.
And if you follow the learning curve, you'd say 5G, you'd probably have at least 300 companies. Now, will they all work? Of course not. And can we predict what they're going to be? Not so much, right? It's
But
difficult.
5G is a necessary pre-existing condition,
5G
right?
is, and actually the other interesting point is if you look at these new companies, they're not actually technology companies. They're business model innovations on top of technology. And so that's going to go into kind of hyperdrive with 5G, and all the existing companies, they have some advantages and disadvantages. One advantage they have is they have a ton of data and they have a ton of customers, but it's like an expiring value asset where they have to quickly figure out how to use the technology to reinvent themselves, or else either a peer company will come along and do it, or one of these new entrants will come along that doesn't have the baggage, and they'll come up with a new algorithm, and they'll be one of these really bad people who's super successful.
Awful. Horrible to be successful.
Apparently that's not cool anymore. So.
And just to put a button on that point, should we look at the rollout of 5G as a necessary condition for accelerating innovation, as kind of juicing economies?
Yeah,
right?
I believe absolutely that's the case. Now, it doesn't mean that you just put the 5G in and wonderful things happen, right?
Right.
There will be mistakes and problems, and the first versions could be pretty heavy and generate a lot of heat and expensive, and maybe it only works if you're standing right under the tower, right? And so it's going to take a while for everything to get worked out. But the countries that don't embrace this, they could have a problem. And so if you take, for example, in Europe, where you have all these little countries and little telcos, spread out all over the place, if they're too small to be able to afford to be able to put this in, I think you could see those economies, have the risk of falling behind.
Are we in the right place, the U.S., having the big carriers that we do and their level of investment, which we've seen up to a point?
I have a lot of knowledge of what the big carriers are doing in the U.S. and also Vodafone and Japan and Korea, and I believe so, and I believe it's important, and it will lay the foundation for the next 10 years of, I think, fantastic innovation. But yet, as you know, there's a lot of capital required. It's not a game for the faint of heart.
That capital's got to come from somewhere.
Yes.
Capitalism sure helps. Well, Michael, I could talk to you for a long, long time, but they scheduled our conversation for a finite amount of time. I had a lot of fun. I appreciate it.
Thank you, John. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michael and John. And I guess, Michael, you have 1 day left for your one company a week acquisition. Unless it's done already, of course. I just want to remind everyone that our season is nearly over, but we do have on December 4th, Dara Khosrowshahi, who is the CEO of Uber, and on December 10th, Larry Fink, the founder, chairman, and CEO of BlackRock. So I hope as many of you as possible will be here with us. Thank you. Enjoy lunch.